there are, it's an interesting question. Imagine someone who is depressed, and they are depressed not because of brain chemistry, because depression can kind of occupy these different layers. Someone's brain chemistry may just be off. And it's not because they've had a rough life. It's not because they've been abused, they've been bullied by anyone. And they simply go to the doctor kind of checks them out, and they come to realize maybe they just need some medication, and that's it. Some people, on the other hand, they have a rough history, whether they've been abused physically or sexually or emotionally, verbally. They carry, and especially if they happen to be very young, if you're old, you can just kind of pack up your stuff and leave. If you have some privilege and independence and power, but if you're young, you kind of just soak everything in. And because you don't really have the power to process, to examine, to reflect, they kind of just stay with you. And you have a lot of anger on the inside, but you have no idea how to deal with it. And eventually things add up. And by the time you're like 10, 15, 20, you realize that on the inside you can't move anymore. And your mood is always kind of down and sad and depressed. And then there comes a point for the depressed person where he or she says, I'm tired of living this way. I'm tired of, making everything die that I touch. Matters very little what it is. And so they go to a therapist and they want to seek some perspective. And I think what they're looking for, without perhaps knowing, is they're trying to find a way to go back in history and change all the narratives, or perhaps change the meaning to the experiences. And it's such a difficult thing to do. So one of the prisons that human beings occupy is the prison of history. And I think the story of Carlton and Will Smith in Prince of Bel-Air is a really, really good example. Would you consider Carlton to be an African American if his parents have never talked to him about African American history, if all of his friends are Caucasians or Asians or Middle Easterners? Because essentially it's the story of the Buddha, which is, as long as you don't experience any difficulties in life, you live in a state of privilege. You don't think, you don't feel too deeply about things, and it's a good place to be. And because, his parents loved him, they said, okay, we're going to create a community where no harm will ever come to him. And that's exactly what happened for about 18, 19, 20 years, where he never saw anyone or anything get old. He never saw anyone or anything get sick. And he never saw anything die. And to some extent, you could say that his parents always gave him just enough food so that he's not completely full. So there's a part of him that still hungers for more food, but it's not given to him. So the desire and the pleasure continues, because if you just eat too many slices of Zachary's, then the pleasure of the pizza goes away in sickness, and then eventually you say, I just don't want to have pizza for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's dead to me. And so I suppose the next question is, does history contaminate people? Does coming to know that you are African American, and this is the history of African Americans, and this is the history of Caucasians, and what they have done to African Americans, will that contaminate an African American who's free from the history? And the answer could very well be yes, And that, creates some interesting, very, very interesting questions, especially when it comes to textbooks in campuses in, say, places like Texas. That if you have African Americans in your class, if you have Native Americans in your class, if you have Middle Easterners in your class, and You pick and choose what history, what form of advertisement you want to introduce to the psyches of these people. Why not remove the toxins? Because we can't really do much about the history. And changing people is very, very difficult. And giving them information that they can't really digest well, that's equally difficult. So is it really bad to remove certain facts of life so that they could keep people in a state of naivete, ignorance? And if I am unaware of my history, and if you're unaware of your history, then you and I probably can be friends. I may be black, you may be white, you may be black, I may be white, but you and I are not poisoned by the history. So I don't have to walk around on eggshell in the sense that I don't have to watch what I say, how I say it, because you have no trigger points. And that's what history creates, trigger points. And there is, of course, you could also say that history makes you aware, but what's the use of being aware but not being able to do much about it? Carlton becomes aware in jail that he was pulled over by the cop because the white cop was racist, and his father can't take him back to, innocence. Will Smith can't do much. Now, Will Smith is already contaminated. He knows that the plates are good, the registration is good, they have insurance, they haven't done anything wrong, they've been going according to the speed limit, and they just get pulled over. The first thing that Will Smith does is just give him your registration license, let's leave. He knows that this could be a dangerous environment for him. Carlton doesn't approach it like that because he hasn't been touched by history. Now, there are some people who say, well, you should keep history alive because it tells us who and what we are. But is it necessary? Is it necessary to know your history? What are you going to do with it? So you're an African American, you walk into a classroom and there are 20 white folks. Or you're a white person, you're taking a philosophy class and you walk into a classroom and there are 20 black folks. Or let's say you're taking Near Eastern studies or Middle Eastern studies. You walk into the classroom, you're the only American and the rest are Middle Easterners. These are difficult situations to be in, because you're already categorized as the enemy, as the other. When you go out with someone, if you happen to have any wits about you, you'll ask them about their history. Are your parents? Are they divorced? How many relationships have you been in? What are your issues? What you're doing is like a good detective. You want to know if your time is worth spending with this person. And as they kind of just bring the history to the surface, you say, damn, this is not something I want to get involved with. It's just too much. The other aspect of history is that, are you anybody without your history? Do you have an identity? Do you have meaning? Do you have purpose? There is this great story about a young guy in prison, and his cellmate is this older gentleman who happened to be very rich. I'm sorry, the young man happened to be very rich, and the old man is not. And so what the young man says to this old guy is, we've been cellmates for a few days, and I can tell you have all these experiences, they're wonderful. And from the way you look, I can also tell that you haven't really had very much money in your life, and so that's why you dress so shabbily. Why don't we do this? I'll pay you $1,000 for every story you share with me. Once I buy the story, you can never take it back. It'll be deleted from your memory. Will you be okay? And then you can take that money, the $1,000, and send it to your wife, to your kids, to your grandkids. And the old man sits and thinks and says, well, that's not a bad deal after all. So every morning they wake up, and after having some prison food, this young man says, well, I'm ready for your story. And this old man sits there and for half hour tells a story to this young kid, and the kid gives him $1,000. After about 6 or 7 months, or maybe a year or two, they wake up and the young man says, "I'm ready for the story." But the old man has run out of stories. There are no more stories to tell. He is completely emptied from within. And then when he has no stories, he doesn't know who he is anymore. He doesn't know what he is anymore. And then he commits suicide. So you have these sides. History makes you who you are, but it imprisons you. Without history, you are free, but you have no identity. Without history, you have no emotional baggages. So you can smile at anything. And you can go into experiences. There are these kids, or this particular illness where you can't experience pain. And it's very unfortunate, especially for parents, when their child is born and soon they come to realize this doesn't experience pain. The proper neurons aren't there, the sensations aren't there. And what makes this dangerous is that the kid could just bite off his tongue without feeling. They could be in the garage and sawing a piece of lumber and cut off their hand without really feeling anything. So, they always have to kind of wear this protective gear. If history creates all these trigger points that makes you much more cautious in life, where to go, what to do, how to be. Without those trigger points, then you can just walk into any environment. The other part of history is that it creates memories for you. Some memories are actually quite fond. They're quite pleasant to have. And without that, our concept of pleasure and pain would kind of go away. But I think on a bigger issue, perhaps, not so much the superficial things that we've talked about, if you were to kind of focus just history within the context of racism, I think it'd be great if somehow you can just remove that particular aspect of history from people's consciousness. That the white person is not going to feel guilty for being white and all the things that have been done in his name, even when he wasn't really there to do all those things. The black kid would not be walking around knowing their history, which would free them. They could look at you and say, "Oh, okay, he's a nice guy," without imposing, projecting the history upon you. Imagine some guy in this class, let's say his father was a military man, and then he went to Iraq, and he got killed in Iraq. And I come into this room as a Middle Eastern to teach this class for a semester, and the moment he sees me, there is anger coming to the surface. And from that point on, his ears are shut. He's just looking for a way, to kind of retaliate and attack me. It's kind of like the Bruce Lee movie, the Little Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, where Bruce Lee is in the gym lifting some weight, and this guy comes in and says, "Get off the weight lifting because I want to do it." He says, "My time isn't done yet." He says, "You guys killed my father in Korea. You have no business being here." And that's the thing I'm talking about. Even though you had no hand, your father is long dead, you didn't even meet him, for example, yet you carry this history. She can't move on. She's stuck to her history.
I do find it, everything you're saying right now is 100% to the T. Whenever I met, when I met my wife, she doesn't go home. My mom was young. I didn't know, I didn't have a history. I didn't know who I was. I went in the military and stuff like that. And I met my wife, and she was like, "What's your history?" I said something about. I asked a question about a person of color. At one point in time, there was some question. She was like, "Racism is still alive. Oh, I mentioned, because they were saying something, I was like, it doesn't even exist. Knock it off. Right? So obviously, we're very, very nice. One of the things here recently, he used to get really mad at me for waving at me. Western thing. And so and she was saying that, don't wave here. Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, people don't wave here. Like, I say hi, and she was like, that's your privilege. She told me that she was like, that's your privilege of being white. And I was like, and I got really angry at first. Then I'm like, that made me, like what you said, like history makes you.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, well, for me, I'm just acknowledging, like, was it namaste that people say?
Namaste.
I say hi to your presence.
Yeah.
Acknowledge your presence. That's how I see it, but I do see how she sees it there. You can do that for your privileges. It's just everything you're saying is.
You know, there is another thing. One of the nice things about history, retaining the history, is if you're able to understand the history, and then if you're able to, a couple of things happen. First, things happen to you. For the most part, you react to them without really thinking about them, reflecting on them, examining them. So you're just reacting. You rarely stop, pause, and say, okay, let me see what the hell is happening here. So you react to the events that are happening. Or let's just say you react to the history. So you have a lot of trigger points. And when you have a lot of triggers, the truth is you have lost the ability to listen, you have lost the ability to observe, to examine, you become very selective, you're very biased, very prejudiced, okay? Now, that becomes a very poisonous history to have, because even though it's unprocessed and you have a lot of anger inside you because of your history, that anger gives you a good amount of power to bully people around. So that history gives you power, but it's all in the negative. Then you have someone who has history, it has been relatively negative and toxic, but they have gotten themselves to a certain stage in life where they say, okay, I want to figure out what this history is. It's like when you go to therapy. I want to figure out why I'm mad all the time, why I'm angry all the time. And then with the help of a really, really good therapist, you travel back in time to the moment where you were 12, and your father did something that just changed the course of your inner life, the way you think and feel about just yourself and life altogether. Now, it's a very torturous place to be. You know, your therapist takes you on this course, about 6 months, maybe 6 years, where you eventually slowly begin to see the history. And it's not easy to see things that are negative about you. So what happens is the moment you begin to see your history, you have all these negative feelings about yourself, about other people who had a hand in creating that particular history. There comes a point, hopefully, if you're lucky, where the blaming game stops. You no longer blame your father, you no longer blame your mom or yourself or this or that. You say, okay, you know what? I am done blaming people because that's not going to help me in saving my marriage or helping my kids. I really want to understand this for me. And then you go through all these conflicting emotions that live inside you. And then you slowly begin to unpack the history that lives within you. And then you begin to examine them piece by piece. Now, and as you begin to examine, you have all these emotions coming up. You want to express, but you can't. You don't have the language for it because it's a new thing. And every time you encounter a new experience that is so unfamiliar to you, it needs time for you to digest it. It needs time for you to come up with a particular language to explain yourself, to express it, to discuss it with other people. And so let's say you come to examine your history and then understand it. and then a few years pass by, then you're able to express your history. Now, the thing about history is that that particular history is not just unique to you. There are countless people out there who have gone through what you have gone through. It's like when someone says, for example, my son just passed away. You have no idea how it feels. You say, well, yeah, it's true. I don't really know how it feels to lose a child, but you're not really talking about losing a child. What you're talking about is loss. Loss in relation to something that you cared for deeply and intensely. I lost my cell phone. In it had the image of my father, had images of my children, had my history in it. And I just lost it. That's a great loss for me, Or someone broke into my house and took my stuff. That's a loss of privacy. I may not have lost a child, okay? I may not be grieving endlessly for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but I have lost something that I cared for. So what we're talking about is just the element of loss itself. Now, when you understand something really, really well and you're able to express it, what happens, you understanding your history allows other people to understand their history by the way you express yours. So being contaminated by history is only negative if the person who's being contaminated doesn't really know what to do with it. There are lots of people like Mike Tyson who have had bad luck in life. But unlike him, they found ways, and maybe they were lucky, I don't really know. They found ways to overcome their anger and go somewhere, sit, like bees. You go somewhere and you just push out all this honey that lives inside you. You push out the anger, then you look at them, then you see them, then you hear what they have to say to you, then you have to tolerate the emotions and the feelings and the moods that they create, and hopefully eventually understand. And then you'll kind of come up with a language and you can be a Noam Chomsky, where your language is only designed to be understood by a certain group of people, or you're unlike Chomsky, you're like Malcolm X or Mahatma Gandhi, where your language kind of just falls into the ears of every common person that can actually understand it. So I suppose one could say that history is only bad especially the negative kind of history, if it lives inside someone who doesn't have the capacity to process it well. And so everything just comes out wrong. Consider for a moment the difficulty of the transgender issue that's currently everywhere now. Or, someone saying, I am bisexual, or I am pansexual, or I'm non-binary, whatever, however you want to put the stuff. What you're really talking about is alienation, that you don't really know what you are. These days we kind of just relate it to sex, but the truth is human beings have always been in this particular predicament where it's difficult for us to figure out what sort of an animal we really are. The idea of polygamy and monogamy has been around for thousands of years. We don't really know if biologically we are meant to be polygamous, you're meant to be, monogamous. These are real issues, and it's ridiculous to sit here and talk about transgender rights or gay rights or straight rights. None of those things really matter. I think the bigger issue is, as a human being, it's really, really difficult to figure out what you are and how you fit in this very confusing structure called life. And so when you just focus on this tiny little issue, it's tiny, it's big, but it's tiny as well, then you kind of miss the point. There is an antidote to all of this. Let me stop myself for a moment. Abigail, anything? Whatever. Whatever, Abigail.
I was hanging out with this person.
Allahu Akbar.
Well, this isn't important, but this is what I was thinking about right now. And then I was looking at this other person. You know what I mean?
So you're having coffee with Russell, and things are going really, really well, and then all of a sudden Tenzin passes you by, and you look at him and say, "Oh my God, he's really, really pretty."
Yeah, but then it seemed like it was something else. Like it was
A connection?
like cheating.
Oh, yeah.
But then that's not really. So yesterday.
Oh my God.
So yesterday, you know I backed on my car. I really don't use it that much.
You want your father to buy your car from you. Just give it to him.
And he doesn't have his license, and then so I was like, oh, he's gonna get it. He said he was gonna get it back soon, so I called him, and then I was like, oh, I can take him there today. I was in Hayward. I stayed there for my family members. I stayed there. And then I called him. I was like, oh, I can take you there. And then when I got there to pick him up, where he was like, oh my God. Once he got in the car, once we started driving around the street, he was like, I can't even get my license yet. And then I just go to my parents' house. And then he just kept doing so many things. It's so immature. It's just hard for me.
Oh, Abigail, please. You should never talk about your parents like that. Abigail, I'm just going to say this one more time. You should never talk about it. Abigail, don't forget your phone. It's under your chair. It's.
He lives at a Motel 6. He lives off his pension. He doesn't do anything.
Abigail? I appreciate everything that you're saying about parents. I really do. As you get older and old age impacts your physical body, where you walk slower, you can't see as well, you can't remember things as well. You begin to also, if I could put it in this way, you begin to walk slower emotionally, you begin to walk slower intellectually, you begin to walk slower psychologically. Everything about you slows down. And as you get older, there are less and less things that become interesting and attractive. I'm not talking about, people who are adventurous, who have an adventurous spirit. For most of us, there comes a point where life just exhausts you. You become more of a grouch. And some of it is psychological, some of it is biological. But I can understand why, as a 20-year-old, it's when you look at someone who is 60 or 70, or maybe even 50, and doesn't have much excitement for life, it's very difficult to see that, because you say, well, Dad, you can go watch a movie, you can go for a hike, you can go on dating apps, figure out if there's someone out there you like, you can go to a coffee shop, grab a book and read. All those things are really, really good. But as long as you have interest in doing them, it's difficult at the age of 50 or 60 to find a book that's interesting, that speaks your language, speaks of your history. And especially parents whose life are less than ideal. The truth is, they had no choice but to put their life on pause for a number of years to take care of their kids. That doesn't mean they've been good parents, but you need to understand that all parents put their life on pause for a number of years. If they have been not such good parents, then what happens after they walk away from parenthood, They suffer from a good amount of shame and guilt for not being good parents. And that devastates you. It really ages you enormously in a short period of time. And to do anything in life, you need, depending on exactly what you want to do, you need money, you need power, you need privilege. And not everyone has that ability to go out there and kind of begin to adventure, into different things.
It's just hard for me to understand because it wasn't even like he had a job, but like I lived with my grandparents.
None of those things matter.
I'm saying like I didn't even see him that much.
It matters very little.
But what did you told about him? If I know it was constant.
As I just shared with you, your father doesn't have to be there to see you, to experience that he's not being a good father physically. He can be far away and be burdened by the memory that he has a daughter and he's never around. And he wants to be around, he just doesn't know how. For the most part, we like to make things black and white, and it works for us. It works for us because should you go to a therapist's office, you can just look at the therapist and say, it's all my father. And then you know who the villain is, and you know who Satan is, who the devil is, and you know what you need to do. You need to crucify them. And what happens in a therapy session, if, again, you have a really, really good therapist like the Buddha, they'll say, okay, well, I have heard your side. Now what I want to do, I want to put you in your father's shoes. The problem with putting yourself in your father's shoes, and this is not to make excuses for anyone, but I think it's mature and wise enough for us, before making judgments about anything, okay, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. See how the world is through their eyes, and then make a determination. Do you want to call them? Do you want to delete their number from your cell phone? That's up to you from that point on, okay? The problem with knowing the perspective, in other words, the problem of putting yourself in your father's shoes, being like the Gospel of Luke, is you know what your position is, you know how you feel about a particular person, okay? Now you come to a different stage in your life, you say, okay, I now want to see how the world and life looks like from his perspective, okay? And then you put your feet in his shoes, and then you begin to see things. The problem is this: initially you're not going to like it, because what happens is what new things that you see begin to contradict your own positions about him. Okay? When you see the world through his eyes, your world opens up, but it doesn't mean it's a good thing, because then you have to contradict your own. You have to oppose your own, rebel against your position. Your position makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel all powerful. You are God. You know right, you know wrong. You know good, you know bad. But the moment you put your feet in his shoes, all of a sudden, good and bad goes away. And that's a very, very difficult place to be, because you want your position, but you also want to forgive him, but you can't. But you also understand why he is the way he is, but you don't like what you understand. It burdens you. You become Atlas, like you're carrying this globe on your shoulder. And you say, I don't want to carry this. Other people's problems are not mine. And if you're in the business of understanding, that becomes your profession. That becomes your obligation. That becomes your responsibility.
I just don't understand because to me there's always something that someone can do.
Really?
Yes.
Have you ever been in relationships? Did you ever walk away? Do you think that you had opportunities to do things differently in that relationship to make it work? See, okay, you're not paying attention.
Sorry, that was distraction.
You're not paying attention.
I'm just saying,
You're not paying attention.
there's always something.
If you are honest enough, if you are honest enough and if you were to go back in time, no doubt you would conclude that you had opportunities to make some changes, but you chose to walk away because it just became too much for you. And you lost interest, and you lost passion, and you lost excitement. So it was easier for you to walk away than to work on it. And that's the story of all of us. You're not unique to this.
Same for you. If he knows he's going to put that much responsibility by having kids on himself, then he needs to stick with that.
You don't understand. Just because you know something, it doesn't mean that you have the power to act upon the things that you know. Do you know that, let me ask you this. Do we have assignments for this class? You know that. Have you done them?
I just didn't do the last.
The last 3. You're talking about 6 weeks, a month and a half. The semester is coming to an end. You know there are assignments. When you know, that knowledge makes you responsible. What do you need to do to be true to the responsibility? You need to summon up what we call will. That you may not like the class, you may not like the instructor, you may not even like the content. But because you want to pass the class, because the semester is coming to a close, you say, okay, I'm going to go to my room, turn on my laptop, and just string some words together, 5, 6 pages, and turn them in. I'll get a C. I don't care for this class. But what you have done at least, you have lived up to what you know. So what happens? You don't think that people have questions? Of course they have questions. But they ask questions without having watched the videos or the audios. They ask questions without having reflected on the videos or the audios. They just ask random, stupid, foolish, childish, infantile questions. And then I try to explain to them, how they should ask the question, what the response to the question is, in all sorts of ways that the videos or the audios talk about, but it goes over them. Why? They don't enjoy sitting, thinking, reflecting, i.e. being responsible. For the most part, when people ask questions, it's mostly gossip. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should actually be responsible for carrying your father's issues on your shoulder. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you have grown tired of feeling the same way, and you feel as if you're at a place in your life where you want to make some fundamental changes, understanding your history becomes very, very crucial because you're bound by it, you're imprisoned by it. And unless you understand it, you will not find the door to get yourself out.
Whenever I look back on my history, I don't really have anything to talk about. I don't know, it's nice to think of that perspective, but then I don't know how I would deal with it.
As I said, there comes a point in life where you say, maybe I should be interested in my history. And when you become interested in your history, no one can accompany you there. It's you and your history. Is it going to make you feel bad? Of course it is. Are you going to hate yourself for having this particular desire of wanting to know your history? Absolutely. Are you able to survive this journey? Maybe not. Maybe you're only able to look at your history for 10 minutes and just say, that was it for me. I'll revisit this 10 years from now. So,
I was just going to say, sorry I haven't done this.
No. That's not the point I'm trying to make is just because you know something, it doesn't mean that you're going to act on what you know. I mean, look, I think we have all been educated in the wrong way. We've been told that if you know something, then you should do it. But that's not true. These are steps you take in life. Just because you know how to stand, it doesn't mean that you know how to run. And just because you know how to run, it doesn't mean that you know where you're going. And just because you know where you're going, it doesn't mean that you know good from bad. It just means you're going somewhere. You're going to make a great many mistakes in your life until you realize something. Then the next task is, are you able to cope with all the things you see about your life and the way it's been lived? Because it's going to be very, very tough. Right now you're young. You have the privilege of being young, energetic, hopeful, dreamy, all that stuff. Like Russell and I, soon you'll be 40. You will be single. You won't have a companion in your life. Because to build anything, you need a solid foundation. To build anything. You want to build a table? Make sure the legs are solid. They're not wobbly. You want to drive your car? Make sure there are no flat tires. And make sure the brakes work. So that anytime you see a danger in front of you, you just push on the brakes. You can't build anything that's lasting on a foundation that's all cracked up. It doesn't work. Now, you have two things. You have dreams and hopes, fantasies and excitements about relationships, about your future. You're young enough to have them. Good for you. I hope you continue to have them. The problem with dreams is that eventually you want them to come true. Human beings are social animals. We like to be around people. We like to be around things. We like to have a dog or a cat if we're not sociable enough to have human beings in our lives. If you want someone to be around you, okay, especially if that's someone, and it doesn't matter who it is really, whether they're mature or immature. You know one of the nice things about seasons? When it's summer, you just put your jackets away. When it's winter, you just put your tank tops away. When you come home, you want to know if it's summer, fall, winter, or spring. If it's going to change every goddamn 2 seconds, no one's going to stay with you. It doesn't work that way. Human beings, by nature, biologically, listen to me, for the past 2 million years, you know what we've been preoccupied with? Stability. Stability in body, stability in mind, stability in emotions, and stability in spirit. We don't like being nomads. We like to belong somewhere. I just want to believe that I'm a Christian. I have this beautiful neighbor, she's like 70. And she knows I teach. And she's a Catholic. She's a wonderful woman. And once in a while and her husband is the same way, and we talk about the New Testament and religion. And the moment I talk about these non-canonical gospels, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Truth, Gospel of Philip, she says, oh, please, 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 let me just believe the Jesus I like to believe in. Don't tell me, give me any more information. What is she saying? I'm 70 years old, man. What, you want to break up my image of Jesus for what? What am I going to do at the age of 70? Well, go to Syria, go to Iraq, go on this journey to figure out who the real Jesus is? Too old for that, man. Let me just live in my belief system. I feel comfortable with that. Why is it that people enjoy hating their parents their entire life? Because the flip side is difficult. It creates not so stable inner world. Why? You love your father one day, you hate your father one day. That's no way to live. It's much better to just hate him all the time. We just want stability. Now, you want a relationship. At the age of 20, you can't. Because at the age of 20, you're in the business of experimenting with life. Fair enough. You want to go out with 5 million people until you're 30, fine. There comes a point for you, not for other people, just for you, that physically you feel exhausted going on dates all the time. Emotionally, you'll feel exhausted listening to people's BS when you date them in coffee shops. You'll feel awful going home alone, being in your bed alone. You want someone, And yet you find that there is no one out there interesting. Or maybe you're just not interesting, period. Or maybe you're just a Democrat, a flip-flopper. You just change all the time. Your moods change all the time. Your feelings change all the time. There's no stability to you. You can't even like yourself. You know, a century ago, 50 or 60 years ago, women just knew their roles. They're going to stay home, bake, cook, raise kids. Men knew. They're going to go out there, make money, give the money to the woman, and the woman will do what she wants to do with the money. That's how life would be for a long time for us. It doesn't have to be right, but it was stable. Now, I'm not talking about abusive environments. Those need to change, sure enough. My mom was 15 and a half when she met my father. She'd never been with another guy. She never spoke to another guy. She was never touched by another guy. My father was the first man. She never cheated. He never cheated. Stability. Were they always in love? Of course not. Was he sometimes cruel and mean? Absolutely. Was she somewhat loud and obnoxious? Definitely. But the culture did not allow people to divorce. The culture did not allow therapy. Because what is therapy? Therapy is you focusing on you. It's like, being on a football team. And whenever you get the ball, you just run. You have like 11 other teammates, man. Pass the ball to someone. You say, no, I got the ball, it's mine. And so the point I'm trying to make is one of the ways that people in the 21st century can find some solid ground to walk on and hopefully to create a foundation. The idea of getting rid of your history, unless you go through this electric shocks, where they put stuff in your head and then they kill off some neurons, you don't want to do that. It just messes up your entire system. But one of the ways that you can kind of shut the voices within is by understanding things about you really, really well. It's going to take you some time. And you're right, you're not going to find very many people. And examining anything, it's always going to be a solitary journey. Always. Imagine you're like gay, and everyone around you is hetero. And add to it the fact that your parents are enormously religious. Your friends are religious. You're the only one who's homosexual. Well, who are you going to talk to? There's no one to talk to. Who's your confidant? You have no one, because everyone could backstab you, could betray you. I could be your friend, you could tell it to me in good times, and then I say, well, her parents need to know. What are you going to do then? The point I'm trying to make, whenever you have some real stuff going inside you, you're always going to be alone. There are no friendships. Friendships exist only in superficialities, or when you're at the funeral of some sorts. And you're young enough to start engaging in your interior with your psyche to figure out what the hell is going on. And hopefully, by the time you're 30, 32, 33, you have figured out a few things.